Bride by Ali Hazelwood. The Arranged Union. Misery stood in the grand ballroom, her heart racing with anxiety as she gazed out at the sea of hostile faces. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood and stale perfume, and the flickering candles cast eerie shadows on the walls. Vampires and wares, sworn enemies for centuries, had gathered together to witness her union with Lo Moreland, a powerful were alpha. The sound of soft music floated through the room, a haunting melody that seemed to match the rhythm of her pounding heart. To her left stood her father, Governor Davenport, his eyes stern and unyielding beneath his thick eyebrows. His jaw was set in a firm line, and his lips were pressed together in a thin, disapproving smile. "Remember, Misery, this marriage is not just about you," he whispered, his voice low and urgent, his breath cold against her ear. "It's about the future of our species. You must make this work." Misery's gaze flashed to Lo, tall and imposing in his black tuxedo. His piercing yellow eyes seemed to bore into her very soul, making her shiver. His dark hair was slicked back, revealing sharp cheekbones and a strong jawline. He looked like a predator waiting to pounce. She felt like a pawn in a game of power and politics, forced to marry a stranger against her will. As she thought back to her conversation with her father earlier that day, Misery's mind wandered to the recent election of a new human governor. Her father had been worried about the implications for their species' survival, but she knew that wasn't the only reason for this arranged marriage. He wanted to secure an alliance with the Wares to ensure their land and power remained intact, and she was the key to making it happen. The priest began to speak, his words echoing through the silent room. Misery felt a sense of detachment wash over her as she went through the motions of the ceremony. When it came time for Lo to take her hand, his grip was firm, but not ungentle. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, his voice low and rough. Misery nodded numbly, her heart heavy with foreboding. As they exchanged their vows, she couldn't help but wonder what secrets Lo was hiding behind those piercing yellow eyes. What did he really want from her? And why did she feel like she was walking into a trap? As they were pronounced husband and wife, Misery's thoughts were interrupted by the applause that erupted around them. The sound was hollow, devoid of any real joy. She looked up at Lo, searching for a sign of what lay ahead. His expression was unreadable, but there was a hint of something in his eyes, a flicker of understanding perhaps, or maybe a shared sense of resignation. They turned to face the crowd, their hands still joined, and Misery felt the weight of the many eyes upon them. This was her new reality, a path she would have to walk, filled with uncertainty and the heavy burden of duty. A complicated alliance. Misery's footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as she paced her new bedroom, her mind a tempest of confusion and intrigue. The room was unnaturally warm, a stark contrast to the chilly night air outside. Her gaze kept returning to the bed, its pristine surface belying the faint trace of her own scent lingering on the sheets. It was as if someone had marked her territory without her consent. The events of the past few weeks flashed through her mind. Her arranged marriage to Lo Moreland, a powerful were, had thrust her into a world of political alliances and hidden dangers. Misery was a vampire, and this union was meant to solidify the fragile truce between their species. But she felt like a caged bird, her every move watched and analyzed. With a determined stride, Misery left her room and sought out Lo, finding him in the heart of the house, his gaze fixed on the moonlit lake beyond the windows. "Lo," she began, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Why does my bed smell like me? Why is my space warmer? And why do I sense your intrusion in my privacy?" Lo turned, his expression guarded but not unkind. "Misery, I understand your confusion. I've been trying to make this transition easier for you, to provide comfort in unfamiliar surroundings." Misery's arms crossed defensively over her chest. "By invading my personal space? By making changes without my consent?" I'm sorry, Lo said, his voice softening. I've overstepped and I apologize. It was never my intention to make you feel controlled. I'm trying to protect you and provide for your needs as best I know how. Their eyes locked, a silent understanding passing between them. Misery's heart softened, but her resolve remained firm. I appreciate your intentions, Lo, but I am not an object to be molded to your expectations. I am Misery, a vampire with my own identity and way of life. Lo nodded, a hint of respect flickering in his eyes. You're right, and I promise to respect your boundaries from now on. I'll ask before making any more changes. The air between them lightened, and Misery took a cautious step forward. What about Serena? What happened to her? She was my friend, and her disappearance weighs heavily on my mind. At the mention of Serena's name, a shadow passed over Lo's face. Serena. She stumbled upon information that could jeopardize the delicate balance between our species. I had to intervene for the sake of our truce. Misery's eyes narrowed, her protective instincts flaring. Did you hurt her? Never, Lo replied, his voice intense. Serena is safe, but she has discovered something monumental. Something that could change the course of our worlds. Misery's curiosity battled with her apprehension. Take me to her, Lo. I need to understand. Without hesitation, Lo led Misery through the house and into the night, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path that disappeared into the woods. Misery's mind swirled with questions and uncertainties, but a glimmer of hope shone through. Together they would face whatever awaited them, for Serena, for their species, and for the fragile alliance that bound their destinies together. Unraveling Mysteries. Misery paced the length of the grand living room, her footsteps silent on the plush rug. The house, with its large windows and the sunlight streaming in, felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. She glanced at Anna, who was curled up on the couch, her breathing even in sleep. Misery's mind was a whirlwind of questions, each one a sharp sting to her already burdened heart. Why did you bring her here, Lo? Misery's voice was a mix of accusation and concern as she turned to face him. Lo's eyes, usually so commanding, held a hint of something softer now. She's my sister, Misery. I had to protect her from the escalating violence between our species. With Roscoe's aggressive policies and the radicalization within the pack, Anna's unique heritage makes her a target. But from whom? Misery pressed, her gaze never wavering. Lo sighed, running a hand through his hair. There are those who would exploit her mixed bloodline for their gain, using her as leverage to fuel the flames of conflict between wares, vampires, and humans. Anna stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. What's going on? Misery's features softened as she approached Anna. We're concerned about your safety, Anna. You know why you're here, because of your unique abilities and genetic makeup. But now we need to discuss Serena's disappearance and how it might be connected to your situation. Anna nodded, understanding in her eyes. I know I'm not like other weirers. My vitals are erratic and I don't shift during the full moon. But what does that have to do with Serena? Lo spoke up, his voice gentle yet firm. We fear there may be a connection between Serena's disappearance and the secrets we're trying to keep about your heritage. We need to find out what happened to her and ensure your safety in the process. Misery added, we'll start by retracing Serena's steps and see if we can uncover any clues. But we must be discreet. The walls have ears, and not all of them are friendly. As they prepared to embark on their quest for answers, Misery couldn't shake the feeling that their journey would be fraught with danger and intrigue. Little did she know that their search would lead them down a path of hidden alliances, shocking revelations, and a bond forged in the face of adversity. Shifting loyalties. The moon's silver glow bathed the Southwest Pack's territory. Misery, aware of the distant howls of the weirs, felt a sense of familiarity rather than fear. Lo's silent approach broke her contemplation. "We need to address the situation with Roscoe and the Loyals," he whispered. Misery's moonlit eyes met his, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "The unrest Roscoe has sparked is just the beginning," Lo continued, concern etching his features. Juno's sudden appearance interrupted them, reporting an attack by the Loyals at the eastern border. Lo's response was immediate, calling for a gathering of the seconds to address the aggression. Misery, determined not to remain passive, trailed the scent of the Weirs towards the conflict. The day's earlier discussions with Mick about the pack's internal strife echoed in her thoughts, highlighting the growing support for the Loyals among the younger members. The financial ambitions and power struggles were evident, threatening the pack's unity. Near the eastern border, Misery encountered a group of agitated young Weirs, led by Emery. "This confrontation must cease," Misery declared firmly. Emery, surrounded by her followers, challenged Misery's interference. Misery, however, stood resolute, emphasizing the need for harmony within the pack. The tension in the air was palpable, yet Misery's resolve did not waver. She knew the importance of addressing the root causes of the discord. "We must find a way to resolve these issues without further conflict," she urged, her voice a calm contrast to the charged atmosphere. The young Weirs, fueled by their fervent beliefs, hesitated, their anger giving way to contemplation. Misery seized the moment of quiet to speak of unity and strength, not through dominance, but through understanding and cooperation. As the group dispersed, the seeds of doubt sown by Misery's words took root. She returned to Lo, ready to support him in steering the pack through the turbulent waters of change, trusting in their combined strength to restore balance and guide their kind to a harmonious future. Deeper connections. Misery and Lo stood in the dense forest, the scent of pine heavy in the air. "Are you sure this is the right place?" Misery whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. Lo nodded with confidence. "They've been here. I can smell them," he replied, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. A rustle to their left caught their attention, and they turned to see Anna emerging from the shadows. "I've been tracking you since dusk," Anna explained, holding up a torn piece of fabric. "And I found this, Serena's cloak." Misery's heart raced as she took the fabric. "She was here," she breathed. "We're close," Lo assured her. "We'll find her." As they moved through the forest, the tension between Misery and Lo shifted, charged with an unspoken attraction. Misery's gaze lingered on Lo, noticing the moonlight dancing in his eyes. Their love was forbidden, a deep-seated taboo, yet Misery felt an undeniable pull towards him. Approaching the forest's edge, they spotted a cottage. The smell of wood smoke filled the air, and the soft glow of candlelight flickered through the windows. Misery called out softly, "Serena?" Lo's hand on her arm sent a jolt of electricity through her. "Let's do this," he urged, his voice a whisper of determination. Together they advanced towards the cottage, their senses heightened by the imminent danger that awaited. The night air was pierced by the distant howl of a wolf, a stark reminder of the wildness that surrounded them. Misery's vampiric instincts tingled as she reached for the door, her fingers trembling slightly. With a shared look of resolve, they pushed the door open, stepping into a fate neither could have predicted. Intimate moments. Misery sank deeper into the warm water of the bathtub, feeling the tension in her body begin to ease. Lo stood by the door, his appearance suggesting he had been active outside. "You look like you've been running through the forest," she said with a chuckle. Lo raised an eyebrow, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "I may have done some running, but it was necessary," he replied. Misery felt a pang of disappointment that he hadn't been with Cohen, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't help but notice how attractive Lo looked in that moment. She felt a flutter in her chest, despite their differences in species. You know, I've seen Cal shift before, she said, trying to change the subject. Lo's eyes narrowed slightly. Ah, yes. Cal is different. The silence between them grew comfortable, and Misery found herself relaxing in Lo's presence. She shared a story about Serena's nightmares, and Lo listened intently. As they talked, Misery felt a sense of vulnerability. Their conversation turned to the intimate moment on the plane when Lo marked her. They both acknowledged its sexual nature, and Lo admitted he had never done it before. I didn't expect it to be like that, he said, his voice low and husky. Misery realized that Lo had never marked anyone before and felt a rush of warmth at his confession. And Gabrielle, she ventured, her voice soft. Lo's gaze shifted away, a shadow crossing his features. Gabby and I... It's complicated. She's my mate. But our bond isn't like the stories tell. It's not always reciprocated. Misery reached out, her hand hesitating in the air between them. He looked back at her, his eyes meeting hers with a depth of emotion she hadn't expected. Don't be. It's not your fault. And right now, you're the one who's here with me. The air seemed to crackle with the unspoken words between them. Misery's heart raced as Lo stepped closer, his presence enveloping her. Misery, he began, his voice a low rumble. There's something I need to tell you. She waited, her breath caught in her throat. I've never felt this way about anyone before, he confessed. Not even Gabai. There's something about you that draws me in, and I don't want to fight it anymore. Misery's eyes widened, her own feelings mirroring his words. But before she could finish, the door burst open and Owen strode in, urgency etched on his face. Lo, we have a problem. It's about Serena. Confronting truths. The night was still, the only sound being the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. Misery stood in the dimly lit room, her gaze fixed on Lo, who sat across from her, his expression unreadable. The tension between them was palpable, a mix of unresolved emotions and the weight of the recent tragedy, the fall of the Eastern Coven which had sent shockwaves through their world. Why did you do it, Lo? Misery's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the turmoil within. Why Governor Davenport? Was the information he held so damning that it warranted his death? Lo's eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something that looked like regret. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, he began, his voice low. The governor knew too much about Serena, about the alliances. His death. It was a message, one that was never meant to be delivered through bloodshed. A message. Misery's hands clenched into fists. You call taking a life a message? How does murder convey anything but our savagery? It's more complicated than that, Lo said, standing up. He walked over to the window, looking out into the darkness. In our world, power dictates what's right and wrong. I did what I had to do to protect our kind, but at what cost? Misery followed him, her own heart heavy with the burden of truth. And what about us? What does this mean for our bond? Is it nothing more than a charade? Lo turned to face her, the moonlight casting shadows across his face. Our bond is about survival, Misery. It's about making sure our species can coexist. But sometimes survival requires sacrifices. Sacrifices I'm beginning to question. Misery shook her head, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. So, this marriage, our connection, it's just a means to an end for you? Lo reached out, his hand hesitating before resting on her shoulder. No, Misery. It started that way, but it's become more. You've become more. You are the unexpected light in the darkness of my existence. The room was silent as they stood there, the distance between them filled with unspoken words and shared secrets. Misery's heart ached with the realization that their bond, forged in the fires of politics and necessity, had grown into something real, something that neither of them had expected. "I want to believe you, Lo," Misery whispered, her voice barely audible. "But how can I trust you when you've taken a life for the sake of a message?" Lo's grip tightened, his eyes searching hers. "Because, despite everything, we're in this together. We're fighting for a future where our kinds don't have to make these choices, and I need you by my side." Misery looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity and the shared dream of a better world. In that moment, she made her choice. "Then we'll confront this truth together," she said, her resolve firm. "We'll find a way to bring justice to Davenport's death, and prove that our bond is more than just a political alliance." As they stood together, the barriers between vampire and were seemed to blur, their connection deepening with the promise of a united front against the challenges ahead. They were two beings from different worlds, but in that moment they were simply Misery and Lo, bound by their shared determination to forge a better future. As they stood there, the silence between them was filled with unspoken promises. Misery's hand reached out, and Lo's fingers intertwined with hers, a symbol of their commitment to each other and to their cause. "I want to know everything," Misery said, her voice firm. "About Serena. About the alliances. I want to understand what we're up against." Lo nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'll tell you everything I know, but we need to be careful. There are those who will stop at nothing to keep the truth hidden." Misery's grip on his hand tightened. "We'll face them together, as one." In that moment, the room seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, united in their quest for justice and their determination to build a better world. Together they walked out of the dimly lit room into a future where the scent of possibility was not just a sweet fragrance, but a tangible hope, as they stepped into the unknown hand in hand, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Acceptance and bonding. As they spent the evening decorating Anna's room and sharing stories, Misery realized that she had found a sense of belonging with Lo and his pack. They were imperfect, but they were hers. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow over the room. Misery stretched, feeling a sense of comfort in her new surroundings. Lo woke up beside her, smiling as he brushed a strand of hair out of her face. After getting dressed, they headed out to tackle their tasks for the day. As they navigated the complex social dynamics within their community, throwing into focus the volatile tension between different factions, Misery noticed that Lo was particularly attentive to her needs. He made sure she was comfortable and included in conversations, even when it seemed like others were trying to exclude her. Throughout the day, Misery couldn't help but think about how far they'd come. From their arranged marriage to their growing bond, they had faced numerous challenges and overcome them together. She felt grateful to have Lo by her side, supporting her every step of the way. In the end, Misery realized that she had found her home, not just with Lo, but within herself. As the day wound down, they found themselves at a quiet hill overlooking the town, the place where Governor Davenport had been laid to rest. It was a moment of reflection for both Misery and Lo, as they considered the legacy left behind by the governor and how it shaped their community. They stood there in silence, each lost in thought, until Lo finally spoke. "This place, it reminds us that we're part of something bigger, doesn't it?" Misery nodded, her eyes on the horizon. "It does, and it makes me realize that what we have is precious." They left the hill hand in hand, ready to face whatever the future held together.